we were just talking about how religious freedom is not true religious freedom in liberalism because of the way that it reduces it to an individual choice and an interior assent. But this leads into a discussion of the common good. We were saying that the reality of Christ, the reality of the church, or the reality of whatever tradition you belong to, it precedes your choice or your assent to belong to it, whether you were born into that tradition or raised in it or came into it as an adult. Nonetheless, it precedes your any choice to or affirmation of belonging to it. And it's those things that, and particularly with Christ and the church, it's those things that make possible freedom and faith, rather than being merely objects of our free choice or objects of faith. And then you go on to say, precisely to the extent that a thing is not given as a reality beforehand, i.e. prior to the agency of individuals, it can be neither common nor in fact a good, simpliciter, or simply speaking. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I think it's important to address the question then arises, because a lot of people, as you point out in the book, would make a distinction between the state and society as a whole, or specifically civil society. Yeah. And they would say, well, okay, but there's a larger common good out there, and the state is only dealing with a small part of that. And religion, just because religion isn't a matter for the state, does not mean that it's not part of the common good, even if it's not part of the political common good, strictly speaking. So how would you respond to that claim?
Yeah, that's there's a lot that would have to be answered there, and it would take a good bit of time to give a complete answer to the question, but to make a couple of basic points that I think are the beginning of an answer is, first of all, the division between the state and civil society is already a kind of a modern, it's a liberal concept. Those are liberal categories already that presuppose a kind of dualism in human existence. But one of the problems in that conception, it seems to me, is that we fail to understand the symbolic character of authority, political authority. So we think that we can reduce political authority to just legal institutions, which we call the state, and then marginalize their relationship to human life. But in fact, laws are inconceivable except as an attempt to give some expression to what it means to be human, and the political order is in a way the realization of a vision of human existence, and it is that inevitably. That's not only the case insofar as rulers attempt to impose a view. It's sort of natural to human existence for it to take a political form, which is to say, the form of an articulation of meaning, because that's the case, this attempt to separate the state from civil society is actually artificial, and what happens is something that I think is, again, couldn't be more evident now, but I think the seeds were there from the beginning. What happens is that the state now, in this reduced form, as this sort of pure procedural regulation of external behavior that is simply meant to establish the grounds for people to pursue their vision of the good, that reduced conception of the state actually becomes the governing horizon that informs the way we conceive of all goods within it. And so I sort of made the argument already before, but if we think of the state as just providing rules of fairness, in fact, that sets a horizon for what is allowed to count as good in fact. And so how does that get translated? How do we see that? We see that in this sort of cultural expression of tolerance, tolerance of diversity and so forth, as the absolute measure for all human behavior. So, I mean, we see that that's an example of how, in fact, a certain conception of the state does willy-nilly. People misunderstand the word. The etymology of willy-nilly is will he, nil he. The original
Right.
meaning is whether or not one wants it. It's sort of necessarily this reduced conception of the state will necessarily give form to even our cultural activity in civil society. It forms what we mean by religion. It forms what we mean by marriage, what we mean by friendship, what we mean by a church, what we mean. I mean, on and on and on and on. It's being informed by the state.
Yeah, you make this great argument that if there's something greater than the political common good over which the state has authority, that implies that and that its religion belongs to that something greater.
Mm-hmm.
Or from a Catholic perspective, maybe a Catholic version of this argument would be that religion simply is that something greater, not contained in the political common good. That would imply that the state itself is contained within and subordinate to that greater good.
Yeah.
That is, you say, if politics is humbly considering itself only a part of the common good, then the state must be ordered to the church.
Yeah.
But in fact, what actually happens in this common good minimalism is what you just said. It treats the minimalism of the political common good as the prior upon which the various potentialities of the wider common good would follow.
Right.
So such that wider common good is actually subservient.
Yeah.
So the state is essentially this kind of negative space within which the church and civil society are contained.
Yeah.
And so, like you were saying, it ends up limiting the horizon for our view of the common good, because the negative principle becomes the first principle.
Yeah.
It's not the greater, wider common good that's determining the horizon of the state.
Exactly.
It's quite the opposite.
That's right. And then that horizon becomes the de facto common good that is, in any event, established. Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the sort of classic Catholic neoconservative arguments that one can have a lot of sympathy for, and there are many good people that represent this position, but talk about the subsidiarity and the need to do more justice to intermediate associations. So you have the individual on the one side and you have the state on the other, but there are all sorts of intermediate communities and institutions, among which is the church. And I mean, that's an old argument,
right.
That's been around for good reason. But if you step back and look at it, what you're saying is just what you described. That it becomes the state then that actually is sort of sets the horizon within which the church has its place. But the horizon is already set, and that horizon is actually going to determine in all sorts of profound ways the nature of, the shape of, the practice of, the reality of the various associations. So it seems to me it's much better to think of it the other way around. In fact, that the church is the more englobing reality, and the state is an association inside of the church. Now, one has to be very careful to how to work out the details. That doesn't mean that you're making the church the de facto political rule. And I have some criticism of certain strands of integralism that I think move in that direction, that think that implies that the church ought to be a political agent. This is a simplification of their position, and again, there are many different integralists. There's a spectrum here, but one version of it is that the church ought to be a political agent among other political agents, and act in a way in and on the state, in a kind of according to the model of ultimately a kind of coercive sense of power. Whereas I think that the point is that the church is the englobing whole, as it were, precisely in a liberating sense and in a properly transcendent sense. So that the church determines the ultimate horizon of things, but it's precisely that enables one to rule naturally. It actually opens up space for the properly political. So I would still maintain that the church has to be understood as an authority, and not simply as a matter of private conviction. The church has to be understood as a public authority, but it's a public authority about the ultimate meaning of things and the ultimate destiny of things, which enables the temporal authority to operate, of the state to operate, or of the political order to operate properly.